And we are live. So I'm gonna grab the link, put it in the general. Oh wait, that's the wrong link. I'm a fool. Can you vamp for a second or help me put this up since I'm so bad at it?
What? You want me to talk?
Yeah. Some would
Oh
say that.
no.
Um,
Well, let me.
there we go. There's the share link, and then
Okay.
uh, I mean, this is the hardest part of the stream. Is like the first 5 seconds. Uh,
That's your job.
I know, I know. It's totally my fault, but I think people should start joining us soon here.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sending out the link to a few individual people who aren't on the server as well, who said they might want to show up.
Okay. I really like my Danny picture.
I like it as well.
It turned out how I wanted it to.
Yeah, I mean, I basically like envisioned that, but like left, right, reversed.
Oh. Oh my gosh. That's the worst, when I'm like reading a book and this is like especially during like dynamic scenes where they're like fighting or whatever, and then all of a sudden they'll be like I like turn to the left where the door was, and I'm like, ah, because I have to like flip the whole scenario in my head.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, you have the chat open, right?
Yeah.
I'm just I'm just said Danny is the father, and yes, indeed. Um, so I don't know if we're waiting for any more. I think this might be it. Is these two? So
That's
uh,
fine.
yeah, we'll just start going. Do you want me to start at the top of the script, or I'll introduce you first? That's better.
I think
This
they need to be introduced.
this is Vic, a person who does not need to be introduced, and Vic edits the scripts that I do and makes all the chapter arts that you see, and supplied the idea for the little art project we did this week for the interlude. Um, who? Yes, no one knows Victoria at all. But I will start trying to save Vic so that there's not confusion later on when a major character is named Victoria.
You can call her something else. She can be Tori.
Oh
Oh,
Lord, I don't know if
yeah.
I can. Tori, um,
Amy and Tori.
Amy and Tori. Well, we'll see about that.
Okay.
I thought you kind of preferred Vic anyway. I just couldn't break the habit of calling you Victoria.
Yeah, either is fine.
um, but let's see here. Victoria 1 and 2. Perfect. It was this great nomenclature. Um, so, start of the chapter 1.x. This is the first of many interlude chapters. It's not clear what to expect when you first start reading. The first third of the chapter is a small chunk of a documentary that's playing in the background of the actual scene. We listen in on a section of narration and interviews about the initial appearance of Scion, the first cape. In 1982, he was found hovering motionless above the Atlantic Ocean and was spotted by an ocean liner, going from Plymouth to Boston. His long hair and skin are a burnished gold. With no clothes or body hair, he looked artificial. He also had an unchanging, neutral expression on his face. Despite his unmoving face, the witnesses say that he looked deeply sad. Oh my word! It's Bryant here. He doesn't have any secret identity, like all these other people who have different names on YouTube. It's just
Aliases.
Bryant, self doxed. Um, but yes, I thought since M missed the first half of the chapter, that we might explain that it is kind of because I had sort of expected people to read the chapter more, and then I realized that M totally missed that part. Um, yes, you go by M Laffer in real life. Good. Uh, can you, Vic? Can you expand on like what the documentary is kind of like?
What it's like. It's a
Yeah.
documentary about um the first cape, which is named Scion. And it's just like a, I don't know, it's like a, I don't, it's like a pretty typical documentary as
It's
far as
kind
I can
of,
tell.
yeah, it's like witness testimonials interspersed with a narrator reading a script kind of thing.
Mhm.
I mean, it's no Hell House LLC, but
Yeah, it's like apples and oranges.
yeah, exactly. Um, when they reached Boston, one of the passengers who had been suffering from terminal cancer found that she had been cured to the point that they couldn't detect she had ever had cancer. Her brother Andrew Hawk had reached out and touched Scion and had to be pulled back from the rail so that he didn't fall off the ship. For the rest of the journey, he fell into a kind of silent reverie, but when they got to Boston, he excitedly told reporters about what they had seen. Um, Scion began showing up several, or sometimes, eventually getting clothes. First, a toga style sheet draped over him and pinned to his sides. Slight improvements were made until years later, in 1999, he ended up with a white bodysuit that he still wears today. In the current year, 2011, the year that it is, he also began traveling around to intervene in human problems, increasing in frequency until some point in the mid 90s. At that point, he never stopped flying from disaster to disaster all around the world with no apparent rhyme or reason to when he would appear. And it's been over 15 years since he's like rested at all. Um, so, Victoria, did you like this sort of documentary style when you first read this chapter?
No, I hate, okay, not just the documentary style, but like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it was like it's almost like an interlude within an interlude.
Mm.
Which like a lot of the interludes do that kind of like have that kind of
Shenanigans.
mechanism. Yeah, exactly. And like you know that like I have trouble like wanting to read that kind of content, like think intermissions in Homestuck.
Yeah.
Where I would just like straight up skip that stuff if it basically until I needed to read it. So this was like kind of hard for me to get through the first time, but like honestly, like on, you know, second and third read throughs, I really enjoy it. But
Mm.
yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about like having basically two interludes and like using this kind of mechanism to get that done. I mean, it's smart because it just makes it so much more dense.
Yeah. It's like I have mixed feelings about it too because I think that it's really good at what I'm going to talk about later about sort of the book teaching you how to read it as you go. But
Hmm.
at the same time, it's like you already have this character who has a really like drastic like mood and tone shift later in the same chapter. So it's like
Hmm.
there's already a really good swing in that way. I do think that the moment it sort of pulls out from the TV is like really evocative. It's especially with the audiobook having the noise of the TV turning off. It just sort of, I don't know, I think that really pops.
It's almost like he was imagining it as a like a visual or whatever. Like I've seen that kind of visual a ton in um like TV and movies where they're showing a screen and then like a character turns it off or whatever and then it moves on.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely like makes me think of that kind of imagery that you're describing. Um, All right, so jumping into the next little bit here. Scion has only been known to speak once. After putting out a large-scale fire in Russia, he stopped to survey the scene and was asked, and I didn't look up the pronunciation of this, so that's my bad, but in Russian, he's asked, "What are you?" Um, and then it's caught on camera in a barely audible voice. He says, "Scion." And then 5 years after Scion's first appearance, the heroes stepped out of the shadows and into the public sphere, with villains soon to follow. In 1989, a sports riot in Michigan, the first hero, Vicaire, was killed, being hit over the head and getting a brain embolism. Vicaire was later revealed to be Andrew Hawk, who Scion had touched when he had first appeared. This ended the golden age of the parahumans, showing the world that they were still human after all. And I wanted to take a minute to talk about Vicaire being killed by a regular person. Uh, what do you think this sort of represents in this story?
Really hadn't thought about it
Okay.
until you said it the other day. Um, and like, but it is like it does bring an interesting thought to it. Um, just like it not only like de mystifies them or like de-godifies them just because he died, but like the fact that it was a normal person is just like a little bit more oof.
Yeah, yeah, he's not killed by another cape, even though he's the first cape to die in public. And M says a level playing field. I I think it's important that he was killed at like a riot setting where there were lots and lots of other people because um powers are like a force multiplier to a person of like an order of magnitude. Like one regular human versus a cape can almost like never win. They can in like really rare circumstances, but even the weak powers are still like a lot. Um, let's see here. And then, are there any parts of the documentary that I didn't talk about that you wanted to highlight, Vic?
No, I think that was pretty in depth.
Okay. And Quinn asks, did it say how he was killed? Yeah, he was like struck over the back of the head, and then uh, like basically he had a brain embolism, so he bled in his brain from the like just blunt force trauma.
I
Um,
guess I do have something I want to say.
oh yeah.
Um, this was the same guy who like reached out and touched Scion or whatever, and then was like in shock afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a really interesting point that I didn't even notice until this read through because I'm stupid. But I don't know, it's just something to think about.
Yeah. It it's interesting for sure. Like later portions of the book will go into sort of the where behind the powers, like where they come from and so forth. And this is sort of the first clue we get that like there may be some connection there.
Mm.
Um, because there's the book is full of like clues and red herrings, and so we'll talk about those and try and remain vague enough that I don't know, our new listeners, however few they may be, who haven't read the book, don't get totally spoiled. Um,
Sigma says, I did find it interesting describing the first heady years as the Golden Age. Parallels the naming for comic books, the worm itself is definitely more of a Dark Age affair.
that's true. I think in the first few years, the impression I get is that the bad stuff of parahumans was not being super publicized, and what you mostly had was superheroes stopping like regular human criminals, um, like in a comic book, and it's just not like that anymore. Like capes mostly don't fight non capes. I mean, they just don't bother.
Not worth their time.
It's usually not. um. Okay, so moving to the next bit, this is where we cut mid sentence from the documentary to our actual point of view character, Danny Hebert. Um, I think this is a really good moment. We already talked about it a bit, but the TV turning off, it goes muffled for uh, the sound of the audiobook. And like Em had said, like Foley work in audiobooks is excellent. Like that's pretty peak stuff right there. And then it goes from the sort of stilted dialogue of the interviews and the pre-recorded script to being like an actual normal. It's like a close second person. Do you think? Um,
Yeah, it's like a I don't know if omniscient second person is a thing
yeah. Well,
where you know the thoughts and the feelings of one specific character, but it's not from their point of view.
yeah, exactly. And that's the kind of view that the majority of the interludes are. Um, there are a few when he was experimenting early on that have like kind of a looser perspective, like the one in the third arc. It's like not clear that it's following anyone, but I kind of think it follows Gallant. I don't know. It so he was experimenting with a lot of stuff early on, I think. Um and not that he doesn't keep experimenting, I just think the experiments were more successful later.
Yeah, I agree.
Um let's see here. Boop, boop, boop. So it's 3:15 a.m. and Danny is wide awake, waiting for Taylor to return. He woke up when he heard her leaving the house just after midnight. He checked her room and found it was empty. He's been up waiting for her since then. He tried to contact the police, but they said there wasn't enough to go on and he should contact them again in 12 hours if she was still missing. Um, As he waits, he keeps glancing out the window where he would be able to see Taylor coming in. He also keeps turning over on the side of his bed, or to the side of his bed where his wife would be, reflexively looking to her for advice and support before realizing she won't be there. He thinks about how uh, he will have the thought daily to call her on her cell phone, even though he knows she won't answer. And I wanted to ask Vic, how do you feel about the slow reveal of what happened to Taylor's mom?
Don't think that he pulled it off. Like whatever he was trying to do, maybe it was like what you mentioned earlier. There's like a lot of red herrings throughout the book. Um, and like this is like one of the first red herrings we get where it seems like it wants to lead us to believe that Taylor's mom died in a much more ominous way, like probably Cape related.
I
And
agree. It always seemed like that was like kind of an intent. So yeah,
yeah. And I mean, I kind of doubt that he like hadn't that maybe he like changed his mind before doing the reveal, but I don't think so. Um,
I think it was to
yeah, I
build
think
tension early on too, in a way that like maybe works better in the serialized version. But by the time that I was reading it, it was completed. So um, M says car accident. Correct. That is correct.
yeah,
Annette
she was
died
using
in a car
her
crash.
phone while driving and she got in a car crash and died. But yeah, I
Hashtag
just
I'ma live forever. Hashtag texting
yeah.
and driving.
I think that it's just one of those things. I think maybe he was going for a certain mood or whatever, or maybe like a gut punch with the fact that it was something, not to like call her death lame or whatever, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Something so anticlimactic or whatever. But I think it was like weirdly withholding.
Yeah, I mean, and I've talked about this with you, but some people got like the complete wrong impression. I've heard people who thought that like Danny had like physically abused Annette on like there. I don't know, like really extreme stuff that doesn't even quite line up with the text if you're like just reading what's there. So, yes, Bryant, hashtag never gonna die.
Yeah.
Um, but moving on. Um, Danny thinks about the fact that Taylor isn't the type to sneak out, not even socializing normally, and never showing interest in alcohol, even when offered champagne for New Year's. He basically thinks she's not the type to get into trouble, but in a sad, has no friends kind of way. He thinks the main two reasons Taylor would have gone running were to clear her head on a Sunday night, knowing she has a full week of school ahead of her, and the second reason he can think of is that she was in some way tricked or coerced by her bullies to go out that late. He thinks about January when Taylor had been taken from the school to a psychiatric ward because of the mental breakdown she had. We don't know yet what happened, but this lines up with when she says she got her powers. The time that she needed to recover after. And yeah, that's the time she said she needed to recover after. Taylor wouldn't say who was bullying her, but under the influence of the drugs they gave her to calm her down, she let slip that it was a group, not an individual. She used the plural bullies. Um, she hadn't mentioned the bullying or the incident since, but Danny doesn't know what to do to improve the situation because whenever he tries to bring it up, she tenses and becomes withdrawn. He wanted to wait for her to slowly reveal the information as she was ready, but it had been 3 months and they hadn't talked about it yet. So let me check the chat. Oh God, Craig was just doing the BoJack Horseman series of things. um, let's see here. What sort of things should Danny have done earlier to help Taylor after her incident in January?
He should have taken her to therapy. It's just like I don't know. And I know that maybe he couldn't have done anything more about the schooling, but like it seems like Taylor is responsible enough to just like do homeschooling or like online schooling. And in this universe, like that's obviously a possibility because there's like
Mm-hmm.
characters later who are just in online school and do whatever they want.
Yeah, yeah.
He probably should have taken her out of school, and I think that they should have gone to either individualized therapy or family therapy would have been fine. And I know that like these are like privileges or whatever that maybe they couldn't super afford because of their financial situation, but we don't hear Taylor or worry too much about funding except as like a nuisance, you know? Like the only time she's brought it up so far is that oh, I have to buy a new backpack or whatever. Um which is more annoying because like she as a child with no job doesn't really have money.
Right,
Um
right.
I don't know. I think those were possibilities and like I don't understand why Danny was like so inactive.
Yeah, it's it's a little crazy. I think they should have been in family therapy after Annette's death,
Yeah,
probably,
exactly.
and then with that, like when the bullying started, they would have had a better relationship to like for her to trust him and talk to him about stuff, and then from there, like let's just say that didn't happen, or it did. Like either way, once Taylor, like let's say we get to January somehow, even when they had the family therapy, then he should have just like also added in individual therapy for Taylor.
Yeah. Put in more therapy. And none of this is like Danny hate. Like, I don't blame Danny. I think that he did a lot of things wrong. Um, but I don't know. I also think even like maybe even if Taylor wasn't open to outright talking to him about the bullying, I think that if they had been in family therapy, maybe he would have a better understanding of her and would be like quicker to catch on that there was an issue.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, let's see here. Is there any chat? Oh, um, why does Danny not feel like a father name?
It totally feels like a father name.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels fine. It feels pretty dad to me. But let's see here. When Danny had threatened to sue the school and the school board, they had settled with him and paid for her medical bills. The school also promised to keep an eye out for Taylor, but Danny thinks of this as a hollow promise from an overworked staff. He tried to change her to another school, but the only school close enough to be in zoning distance was Arcadia, which has a waiting list of at least 200 students. And then, do you think that transferring to Arcadia before the school year began would have solved Taylor's problems?
Yes. I don't think that Taylor is like a natural like target for bullying. Like she's a little bit awkward or whatever, but other people generally seem to like her. Um, like we haven't gotten to this, but like her classmates that aren't sucked into like the popular crowd or whatever, like get along with her fine. And she's like obviously being targeted because she used to be friends with Emma.
Right, right. I agree. I really think that with without the specific targeting that she would have been fine and been able to um like normalize her school life, and the fact that she hadn't even really fallen behind in classes until the story start means that like academically she would have been on a fine track. I think that she could have made friends at Arcadia. There's also like a different school atmosphere there that they talk about later in the story that I think would have like helped her, but just everyone had this sort of vague notion that they might be talking to a superhero all the time when they were like meeting other students, so they were just less shitlords to each other, you know,
Yeah.
less teen. Um Sigma says, "You know what? I'm realizing Worm and the Heathers have non-trivial overlap." True. And then M says, "Do we not know the origin of the falling out with Emma?" Um, I think it's worth waiting to talk about that because it's not touched on in the story for quite a while. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
I think that's something that's withheld that like actually adds something to the story by being withheld.
Yeah, that's kind of the line of like what I want to talk about and what I don't want to talk about is uh like something that I think really contributes to the narrative to like be revealed when it's revealed. And there's a lot of like world building that just can't happen early on because there's like it would just be a lore dump, but that isn't actually spoilers.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um let's see here. Where are we? Danny can't shake the idea of the bullies that the bullies lured Taylor out. He only knew about one incident, but from the severity and other clues, he was able to piece together that this was a pattern of incidents. From Danny's perspective, the bullying is what drove Emma away from spending time with Taylor. In a twisted way, he's right, but really has the wrong idea of the situation. I've always thought that Danny had reached out, that if Danny had reached out and tried to find out what separated Emma and Taylor, he could have intervened and helped Taylor earlier. Do you think this is like a realistic view of the situation?
I think that I don't know. It just is like a kind of a weird perspective for him to have to not even think about that possibility. Like her best friend isn't friends with her anymore. Why could that be? It kind of seems like sometimes he's in denial. Like I
Maybe.
think that he has an answer in his head, but he just like doesn't want to say it or think it.
Oh, okay. So this is actually good. I hadn't thought about this angle yet, but it's kind of like his version of the compartmentalization Taylor shows.
Hmm.
Um, I had never thought about it like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, and we'll
Um,
see him do it later when he
mhm.
hears Taylor go into the basement and he's like, she couldn't be in the basement.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Um, Quinn says, "Do kids with powers in school ever get in huge fights and destroy things?" They don't. They're not. They don't have public identities as the heroes. They're like people with civilian identities and then hero identities. So, um, they if they were to use their powers, then they would lose the secret identity, and that would be a pretty big disadvantage for them. Let's say.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think there's ever been a powered fight at Arcadia up to this point. So, let's see here. I like how the next paragraph opens. The single word impotent strikes harder than like something like he felt impotent or a similar variation. And then the next sentence expands on that Danny was helpless where it counted. The timing of the sentences helps the ideas land harder while staying compact. Danny doesn't know what to do. When he called the police, they told him there wasn't enough to go on and that he should call again if she's still missing in 12 hours. So Danny's waiting with dread in his heart for a phone call from a nurse or police officer telling him something has happened to his daughter. And then, do you want to talk about all the phone and phone call stuff?
I just think it's interesting that he mentions phones so much in this chapter, and it's only like 3 or 4 times really, but it's more than any other chapter. And like even in the future, like we only really talk about phones in depth when it's like surrounding Danny. Like because of the trauma that he has about his wife, um, and her phone.
We were joking
It's
earlier, but she wasn't actually texting and driving. This was in like it would have been in like 2007 or 8, I think. So she was like talking on the phone. Well,
yeah. So
trying to call someone.
he's always awaiting ominous phone calls and he thinks, oh my God, like, why doesn't Taylor have a phone? And then he's like, obviously, I know why Taylor doesn't have a phone. It just seems like it's always in the back of his mind, which is,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is also interesting because he doesn't ever feel that way about cars. So I think it's just like a
Yeah.
cool way to like point out how trauma can kind of like have maybe not irrational triggers, but like kind of weighs them differently.
Yeah, yeah. And like he even one thing that I didn't mention, I don't think in any of the script, but that is specifically said in the chapter is that he always thinks about calling his wife at least once a day. Um, so I
That's
mean, there's that too. It's just like everything from all angles.
yeah.
Um, but let's see here. Maybe I do mention that. I don't know yet. It's at this point when at last Taylor comes into the house. Between the shifting of the air, the old house, and Taylor being too exhausted to remember to muffle her noises at first, Danny knows she's back. He felt relief and fear together, emotions paralyzing him into inaction. He doesn't know if he should go downstairs to see Taylor, thinking that he might make her feel even worse if he sees her at her most vulnerable. He takes into account how she's always done her best to avoid letting him know, averting eye contact if the subject was brought up, giving off all the signals she could not to press her about her bullying. He thinks that she may need there to be separation between the bullying and being at home, not wanting to blur those lines. His behavior, unbeknownst to him, feeds directly into her like compartmentalization. Um, so he worries there's a chance Taylor doesn't want to open up to him about the bullying because she doesn't want to seem weak in front of him. I know you have thoughts, Vic, on Danny being driven into inaction by his emotions. Can you talk about that?
We kind of touched on it earlier with him, like not having done anything after Taylor's trigger. Um, and I guess he did like talk to the school about her getting her transferred, but then when there was pushback there, he was just like, "Ah, these damn rules and regulations." Didn't think about taking her out of school, didn't think about going to therapy, you know what I mean?
And it feels like he
And then
never considered moving, like, at all.
yeah, and he does it again here um with Taylor coming in and him just like sitting there frozen. And I think it's really interesting because it's like Danny and Taylor have so much overlap, like with a kind of very strong emotions, and compartmentalization and control issues and that kind of stuff. But like definitely the main difference between them is that Taylor is kind of disgusted by inaction and Danny seems to be um overtaken by it a lot.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about that, but like, it's never directly addressed, but like, her dad, because, she kind of, has rough times later with her relationship with him. He kind of is like a bystander to her bullying from her perspective, probably, even if she never says it specifically.
Yeah, he's got that bystander syndrome, but she doesn't seem to hate him for it. Like maybe later on she resents him a bit, but not anything compared to how she seems to hate other bystanders.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, let's see, where was I at? Um, and we'll talk in the characters section like more about that because we'll talk about Taylor and Danny as they sort of reflect each other. Um, Sitting down on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees and hands run through his hair, he stares at the door. He listens intently for any noises, hears a downstairs door open, then close. Then again a few minutes later. He thinks it must be the bathroom door because the closet door would only need to be open and closed once, and there wouldn't be any reason to go into the basement. Um, and so you had mentioned this as part of his compartmentalization, which is like an interesting new thought for me. But what I had thought before is that it was sort of a nod to how easy it is to dismiss little signs that someone's a cape. Um, like how, characters later on, like Lisa, will be able to hide her identity so easily when she's a cape, with like just little tweaks to her appearance.
Yeah, definitely. It's even funny, like the fact that people don't know who the capes are at Arcadia, though I think it would be really easy to figure out who it is.
I agree. I mean, one of the reasons they talk about in a few chapters, like they can't send too many of the wards, the kid capes, out at the same time, but then they just do anyway.
They just do it anyways, like multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, the pretense gets thinner and thinner as the series goes on because like, the series starts at a tipping point for the city, with like Lung's arrest basically. Um, Taylor coming onto the scene like really changes things overall. Moving on. He heard a bang on the counter, then only creaks of the floorboards for 5 or 10 minutes before he heard Taylor ascend the staircase. He considers clearing his throat to let her know he's awake and knows she's there in case she needs to talk. Or no, he's there in case she needs to talk. Then, feeling cowardly, he doesn't act on this idea. Her door shuts with just a hushed tap of the door on the frame. Danny suddenly stands and opens his door as though he was going to check on Taylor. When his door is open to the hall, he smells jam and toast and is filled with relief, thinking that if Taylor had been tormented, she wouldn't come home and make jam and toast as a snack. He decides that Taylor is at least all right enough to be left alone. and we get the second major emotional pivot of the chapter in just a moment. So I think we should take a minute to talk about the mood swing and tone shift of it all.
Um, I think it's really good. I think that Wildbow just writes emotions so well, and like how quick they are to change and how it like blocks everything else out.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a good aspect. Like the characters are the core to his writing, I think, because before he got everything else right, he got the characters right. I mean, even from the very start, his cape fights are pretty sick, but like they wouldn't matter if they weren't, you know, built around these people that we get to know.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I do agree with you saying that like this tone shift maybe would be more impactful if it cut the chapter in half instead of cutting it into thirds like it does, since we have the documentary at the beginning of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I even realized when I was doing the script that the majority of the chapter is the Danny reflecting and worrying part. It's like the first third is the documentary, then of what's left over, only the last quarter of that is Danny angry. But it's so evocative, I think, and like sticks with you that it feels like a bigger part of the chapter. Um, and yeah, if it was like a 50-50 split or like a two-thirds Danny, one-third Danny angry, then I think that would be really solid. Anyway, with a shuddering sigh of relief, he goes back to sit on his bed, and when his relief sparks into anger, that's when his relief sparks into anger. Anger at Taylor for making him worry, anger at the city for being unsafe, anger at the bullies. Uh, Below it all was a foundation of frustration and anger with himself. He's failed to do anything that helped Taylor. He couldn't get answers to help protect her, and to Danny, the worst part is the moment he realizes that this may have happened before and he just slept through it. He wants to go into Taylor's room and demand answers from her, not only about where she was tonight, but who's been bullying her all this time. He knew that angrily confronting her would not help the situation. I think he's probably right, and that it would have driven a wedge between them at this point if he had questioned her like that. And then at this point, what do you think that the best thing Danny could do, like going forward, at the point we're already at?
Ugh. It's like hard to say because
We're so deep in
uh
the hole.
well, it's also like, you know, I don't have a good example of this, but you know when you're watching like technically the thing he should do is something, but if he were to do something, it would ruin the story for us. Does that
Right,
make
right.
sense?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so it's
like,
like we don't want him to figure out what's happening with Taylor because she has a secret identity and she needs to be doing this like for her character or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
But
for
yeah.
sure. And the other thing is that, like, if he had done everything he needed to do, if he had known to go to family therapy after Annette's death, like, she wouldn't be a cape. It wouldn't be the book. So, yeah.
Yeah, we needed Danny to suck a little bit. He definitely should do something though. And like later we find out it's not uncommon for people's families to know that they're capes. In fact, it seems like it's more common um than not for somebody's family to know that they're a cape. And so with her wanting to be a vigilante, like maybe that's not exactly what he wants, but she's gonna be a hero, and I don't think that he would be unsupportive of that.
Yeah. It's I think that there's like multiple things. It's like when he I know it's in the next chapter, but she'll think to herself, like, I wonder if he would be more or less worried if I told him I had a power. And it's like, I think the answer is an immediate more worried. He would be like very concerned about the idea that she's fighting people with superpowers.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, I mean, his idea of like what might have happened is like someone might have had a knife. And it's like, well,
Oh,
um, let's see here. Danny thinks about his own father. Once again, we get a self description by comparison to another person. His father was a powerful, heavy set man. Danny is stick thin, awkward, has glasses, and even in his own mind, he has a bad fashion sense. That's what I wrote. Well, he didn't get his father's physical traits, he got his rage issues. His anger is quick to rise and startling in intensity. However, he had only hit someone because of it twice when he was much younger. While he hadn't used much physical violence, he was known to go on tirades that left people shaking. He swore to himself that he would never lose his temper with his family, and views this as when he matured into an adult. He didn't want to pass his anger issues on to his child like his father had, which, I think we can't move past this part without talking about how Danny like totally failed at not passing on his anger issues.
I think that that's something that's a little bit more genetics than some people think. Right?
Yeah, well, it's also like really background stuff that's hard to control, like little things about the way you act will impact children. And it's like not stuff that you would typically think of. Like I have just this very shaky grasp of like early childhood psychology, but the most important bits I got is like it's all important. They read expressions. They're most kids are paying attention to people's faces. Um, they notice things like pupil dilation because they're not like necessarily focused on the world around. They're more focused on people in their vicinity because it's like early bonding and learning like other human behavior and stuff.
Mhm.
So,
And something I guess that would come up later on is that Danny obviously needs to isolate himself to control his anger. And so Taylor's never, well, maybe she saw it from her mom, but at least from her dad, she never saw like coping mechanisms for anger. And so she wouldn't be able to, learn that from other people.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Um, doo, 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 doo. And then Danny was able to keep himself in his room because he had never broken his rule with Taylor. She had still been around him losing his temper on at least 3 occasions. Once at his work, when a mayor's aide told him there would be layoffs contrary to promises about reviving the docks made by the mayor. Um, One time 4 years ago, when he yelled at Taylor's mom, Annette, and she had seen. I said here she had seen it, but I was actually wrong. I reread that part, and uh, he thinks that she heard part of it. And like
Yeah,
this is
and
another
the way
spot that's super vague, and we talked about this, and you hadn't even known the context exactly because it's so confusing.
The way that it's phrased first, I was unclear like if Taylor had been like in a nearby room and been able to audibly hear it, or if it was something that she would heard about from other people just because of how it's phrased, because he says like Taylor wasn't around to see it, which is a weird way of saying that. Um, and then
Hmm.
I hadn't known that this time that he flipped out on Annette was after she was RIP.
Yeah, yeah, it's supposed to be like if I remember the later scene where Taylor thinks about this, it's that they were in the funeral home and he had been like, "Why were you talking on your phone in the car? Why are you dead? You can't leave me alone."
That's so terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like he didn't know how to sublimate his feelings into like anything. Like he just had no outlet, and You know.
Yes, Emily, she was dead, and he yelled at her, um, like at the funeral home or whatever. Which like I've definitely like seen people do in movies and TV before, but usually it's not to the body. It's like just to a, like a gravestone or something. I think
Yeah,
it makes it a little worse.
yeah. I mean, it's again. This is not like normal anger. This is like rage issues problems.
Um,
This is Taylor personality, but dad.
yeah, anger is one of the stages of grief. And he's always angry too, so probably didn't help. It was actually double anger.
Yeah, and it doesn't turn you into a double Hulk when you don't have Hulk powers.
Yeah.
Let's see here then. The last time Taylor had only seen or had only heard and not seen him in January when Taylor was in the hospital, Danny had yelled at her principal and the teacher in the hallway with enough intensity that a nurse threatened to call the police. And then only after walking away from this interaction did he realize that Taylor was close enough and aware and awake to hear the whole thing. He had a deep seated fear that this was why Taylor wouldn't come to him about her bullies, that um, she'd be worried that in a blind rage he might do something like, I don't know, just like kill a kid. Who knows?
Come a little bit.
Just fuck him up a little bit.
Yeah.
And then he worries that he's only fed into his daughter's self imposed isolation and he feels sick. Sigma says he'd go all along. Yeah, exactly.
Start
Um,
shooting kids.
and you know what? You don't stop when you get them once. You gotta shoot twice, so there's no chance that they do a trick and get away. um, then it took Danny a long time to calm down, which he was able to do by telling himself over and over that Taylor was home and safe. As the anger faded, he felt drained. He leaves the right side of the bed empty out of habit, and he pulls the covers around him. He decides he'll talk to Taylor in the morning, and the chapter ends. He dreamed of the ocean. Uh, I don't know what it means that he dreamed of the ocean, but I think it's a really good line. Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, it's just because of the documentary that he was watching, right? Because that's how the whole chapter starts, is them talking about the ocean. Um, that's what I always thought. It was just supposed to like round it out a little bit.
Oh, yeah, you could be right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
thought it was supposed to imply something based on the dream, and I guess I was overthinking it in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I mean, it definitely
Mhm.
could mean something thematically, but like, I think that's why that's the last line.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. There was at one point, I forget if it was one of the Doof Media podcasts, but they had speculated that the him dreaming of the ocean was like a foreshadowing of Arc 8, basically. And I think that's a little bit of a reach. um, but yes. So that is the end of the chapter, and we're gonna do our regular like end of episode themes, glossary, etc. At this point before the arc roundup. M says I want to know about the ocean. Um, like was he
Like, what?
swimming? No. Oh, Danny in the
Maybe.
ocean? Sure, he could be swimming. Um, let's see here. Yeah, when I looked up what the ocean was supposed to mean thematically or like in dream, whatever, which I don't in real life believe that dreams have specific significance, like in terms of exact images, because like different people's minds work different ways. But all of them were very like tied to is the ocean calm or is the ocean choppy, aside from one which was the only example I saw of this, which said that a dream about the ocean is supposed to indicate like general uneasiness, and I thought like that kind of fits, but that's just like really generic, so I didn't think he necessarily intended it or whatever. Um, anyway, the themes. Bullying is, of course, talked about in this chapter. It totally dominates Danny's thoughts because of how it's been like destroying Taylor's life over the past year and a half. Do you want to add anything to any of these themes? I'll just let you tack on anything. Or...
We can just mention again that Danny is now a bystander, which is
Yes,
like which is the
spoke.
second worst thing you can be. Yeah, it's the third spoke. There's bullies, victims, and bystanders in Taylor's life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, very good point. And then I wanted to just put trauma as a theme. Like it's very clear that there's the underlying force of trauma from like Annette's death, from Taylor's bullying, like just dealing with these different things. Um, the sort of unspoken trauma of Danny neglecting Taylor after Annette died for a while. They don't talk about that until later, but I think it's always kind of under the surface. Like she's
Yeah,
very self reliant.
the way that they think about her is very different. Like Danny is obviously always thinking about Annette. Um, like just in this chapter, which is, I don't want to spoil anything, but you really only get one interlude chapter per person. So this is like the only insight, like direct insight we see into Danny. And he's absolved, just totally um unable to separate Annette like from his day to day. And Taylor really rarely mentions her unless it's necessary for a story.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. She sometimes will think of her like I can think of her either replaying anecdotes in her mind a few times or talking about her in an anecdote to someone, but it's like less than once an arc
Hmm.
because it's usually it's when she doesn't know what to do morally that she starts thinking of her mom and not her dad because I think she sort of relates herself to her mom and not to her dad. And I do think she's very similar to her mom, also, has huge overlap with her, but she doesn't recognize the overlap that she has with Danny because they don't know each other. So, yeah. Um, and then uh, I had been sort of mulling over before we did the start of the live stream. I didn't put it down here, but I thought for the theme of the book, conflict escalation, this is like an interesting counterpoint in that, like, in terms of dealing with his own, like, anger and stuff, everything with Danny is de escalation rather than escalation. And Taylor is always, like, ramping things up.
Yeah.
So it was just a little tidbit. For the glossary, unless anyone in the chat wants something specific talked about, or unless you want something, Vic, I couldn't even think of anything in this chapter that needed to be defined or talked about, really.
Really, I guess we can. Is Scion a character or a
Oh yeah.
glossary item?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Scion. I put Scion in the character section,
Oh,
not
okay.
not like a
That works.
glossary term. Um,
That's fine. He's just talked about a
like
lot
so
because
distantly, and yeah, yeah.
yeah, because to everybody he is completely inhuman basically. He's talked about more like something I'm trying to think of how to say it. Like something that's more
Like otherworldly is not the right term, but it's something like
yeah,
that where he is so distant from even normal capes that it's just
force of nature. That's pretty good.
force of nature. Yes, exactly, Greg. Exactly right. Um, and
No, Scion is the golden man who they first saw on an ocean liner and now he just flies around doing good deeds. getting cats out of trees and killing bad guys.
I don't know that he actually kills people.
I don't think he kills anyone. He just beats them up a little bit.
Well, he's so his powers are so like overwhelming to a normal cape, um, that he doesn't need to kill people.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
He like gets people out of fires and stuff.
yes, and Greg's right as well. Vicaire was the guy who had gotten killed in the riot, and was killed by a normal person. Um, I don't think we ever learned what Vicaire's power was. So I mean, I don't think we would learn too much from learning what his power was, really, because he's more of like a symbol of the past than like a character, you know? But I didn't include Vicaire in the character section. um, let's see here. But I wanted to start off the character section not with Cyan, but with Danny Hebert. Um, Danny has flaws, but as Miles O'Brien would say, he's not just a hero, he's a union man. He feels responsibility to the people around him and fights hard for the workers at the dock. He's always been accepted by the dock workers despite not fitting into their like typical image. He was a gawky nerd and all this, but they just, welcomed him anyway. And Danny spent the last 4 years trying and failing to move past his wife's death. It's been a huge thing. And then Vic, I feel like, do you want to add more? I didn't even know how to talk about Danny because talking about him is like so complicated.
Yeah, I love Danny as much as I have shit talked him in the chapter. But um this I don't think this is like spoilers to say in the very next scene we're going to see like Taylor interacting with Danny from her point of view,
Mm-hmm.
and like these like stark I just love the stark side by side comparison of these chapters and like how Danny sees himself versus how Taylor sees him.
Yeah.
And I just related to that a lot, where it's like he is so worried about these couple of times where Taylor has seen him like rage out, and she doesn't give a shit. She never mentions it. She never thinks about it. She doesn't see him as an angry person or somebody who could fly off the handle at any point. I think she sees him as like
Mopey.
he's like yeah, he's kind of like a dope, and but somebody that she kind of relies on emotionally to be consistent, like in her home life.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I mean, it's not like it's another one of those things that like just reading between the lines, but I think that she respects her dad a lot for like the position he holds in the community and
Mm,
for his attempts to revitalize the area they live in. Like I I think that she carries that forward with her and it guides some of her actions later. I think she, consciously or not, really latches onto that.
yeah, I agree. I think it's actually pretty conscious because she sees his responsibility and like how hard he fights for other people as like so positive, and she seemingly wants to emulate that.
Yeah, yeah. And like I think of a specific scene much later where she and him see each other just in public and then they talk for a few minutes and this like brief meeting, by chance in the city leaves this like big impact on what she does for the next like while in the story. Um so yeah. He is obviously a huge force in her life and we'll be seeing a lot of him overall. Um, so at this point, we'll talk about like Taylor is kind of like a reflection of Danny in a lot of ways. They're both defined by their routines. They've both got rage issues just below the surface. They both feel responsible for other people around them. like that they need to solve other people's problems as well. Um, and I mean, kind of what else? Like there's kind of a lot there, but I'm just blanking on all the little facets.
Say, that's true. Sorry, just a second. COVID. Um, they're I'll just talk about some ways that they're similar and different.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're really similar in direct ways, like their distaste for what they view as red tape, basically. Like any rules and regulations they feel like are in their way. Danny mentions that with like his work with the dock workers, and he mentions it with the like his inability to get Taylor at another school. Um,
Yeah,
and
and I
then
mean, I think like following with that, another good example is his trying to revive the ferry is just like that, where it's one of his biggest like hot button issues is that the mayor keeps like promising, then saying, "Oh, we can't because of X, Y, or Z."
they also like not only feel the responsibility over other people, but they like take a lot of pride in that responsibility, which I think is something that can vary because some people feel like that's like a weight on them in some sense. But like Danny and Taylor take that more as like a
It gives them
staple.
fuel for sure.
Yeah, it's their purpose. Danny works with he
He's
works with like a bunch of blue collar workers, right?
Yeah, he's the head of the Dock Workers Association, meaning that he is essentially head of the union. So he's a union leader in a city where they have essentially closed down main shipping to the dock because, or to the port, because aside from damages to the port in like union versus police battles in a, times before parahumans, so like a long time ago, they also were just out, how to say it, they were put out of business by bigger ports having better facilities that could have those big cargo ships like the modern day ones. So this is like a real phenomena in American ports where a bunch of them just became defunct immediately once cargo ships were a thing. Um,
Professional dad, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and then like we said earlier, and this is like kind of a bold statement about both of the characters, but let's say they both have issues with compartmentalization, and I would say that Danny uses his compartmentalization to um, justify inaction and to de-escalate, and Taylor uses her compartmentalization to justify action and escalation.
I agree. Yep. Um, so do we want to say anything more or move on to
We
Zion?
can move
Okay.
on.
Okay. Yeah, I know we've said a million things about Danny. Um,
Yeah.
so Scion. Scion is a mysterious figure. His appearance in May of 1982 marked the beginning of the parahuman phenomena that would begin happening throughout the world. He began saving people and slowly ramped up his activities until a point about 15 years ago when he began to permanently fly from crisis to crisis, never stopping. His skin and hair are a burnished gold in color. Beyond that, due to his lack of body hair and unmoving face, many people say that he seems artificial. His costume is a plain white bodysuit. He does not actually wear a mask. He has no secret identity. I mean, he does have golden skin after all. Um, and I guess his face itself is a mask because it's unmoving. Um, and then do you want to? I think we should talk about him a little bit before we actually talk about the little powers blurb I put.
Really have anything. I guess maybe we should mention what we know of Scion's powers right now, which is that he can seemingly heal people with a touch, and he flies around a lot.
Yeah, he can fly. So what we know for sure is what Vic said. He can fly at the speed of sound. Um, most uh, most of the things that were described, they used words like quelling and putting out, so he can like put out fires somehow, um, and like he stopped a volcano from erupting. So, um, you know, um, but yeah, so power is what I had written as the little blurb is his powers are mostly alluded to in this chapter rather than talked about. He can seemingly address and resolve a wide variety of situations. The powers we know are that he can fly at the speed of sound and he can heal cancer, the two people on the ocean liner. We also presume from the fact that he never stops flying around and saving people that he doesn't need to eat or sleep. Um, can he turn back time like Superman? Um, uh,
No?
no, I don't think he can. Um, I mean, the way that Superman does it, especially not, because Superman grabs the Earth and spins it backwards so that the time goes backward for 3 days because he spins it 3 rotations back. I
Oh
mean,
yes. Did we maybe we didn't even mention that people look at his face and he looks sad.
yeah, yeah. When they see like a camera footage of his face, he looks normal, but when they're close to him, they're like, he's sad.
He's so sad.
Um, and I like what Greg said. He probably cries the fires out. Um,
And he's also only ever talked once, and it was to introduce himself.
yeah, he just said his name. He didn't even say like my name is. He just was asked and answered.
Yeah.
Um, see here. Okay, I didn't fill this in super. I was falling behind on all the little things. So the powers, knowledge, and general world building. There's kind of a lot in that documentary chunk. It like does a lot with a little. It feels like a whole chapter of like just lore, and it's a third of a chapter. So,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. It's just all the backstory, like the fact that I mean, it's not exactly confirmed, but I'll just say it. The split point between like the real world and this setting is May of 19 or might be an earlier month, but it's 1982. Um, and then from then on, it just went from what we know to like this much different world in about it's 29 years later in 2011. Um, do you think there's anything that we should mention specifically? No?
No, just that Cyan was the first. As far as they know, Cyan was the first superhero. And originally they didn't even like think that superheroes were. I guess they never like outright said like that they were inhuman, but they thought that they were godlike to some degree.
Yeah, and they also it took a while after Scion appeared for they said the heroes to come out of the shadows. So there's like 5 years when parahumans are just thought of as like rumors and like the same way people think of like alien sightings. You know what I mean? Um, so I guess that's interesting. They kept it under wraps for a long time, really.
Yeah, it's really strange. And from the documentary, it comes off as if people with powers were accepted immediately. And maybe they were accepted immediately until the villains started showing up.
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly. Maybe the documentary had a skewed perspective of
Yeah, I
being an
think it
early
was a
chapter.
little bit, I think it was a little bit ch-
Flowery.
trying to clean up our history with them.
Yeah, it was the golden age.
Yeah,
Um,
it was amazing, guys. Nobody was mean to these people.
ain't nothing bad ever happened on this mattress. Um, let's see here. Yes. So, now we are at the Arc 1 reflection. I only put down some bullet points because I wasn't sure how we wanted to go about talking about it, but I put a couple bullets for each chapter. Do you want to go through those, or do you have an idea of?
You go ahead.
Okay, so in 1.1, it has a quick establishment of like Taylor, the bullying, the bug power, her like civilian life nemesis. In 1.2, we get a reflection on her past friendship and betrayal, costume explanation, and her resolution to go out. Get to see her mindset a little bit as well. Um, 1.3 is setting building. Really lets us know that this is like a grounded setting when we learn some of the history of the city and stuff. That like actions have consequences. A leads to B. And then has connecting scenes to get her to her first fight. And then 1.4, that's when she, hops out at Lung. Despite relatively simple fight, we get good examples of how Taylor thinks through cape fights. We get to see how the book sort of, how to say this? Can you help me think of it how to put the book has different fights than other like superhero stuff. It's more about like
It's more about like whenever there's a new Marvel movie or whatever afterwards, people are like, "Oh, why didn't they try this?" And it's like crazy stuff like Ant-Man crawling into Thanos' asshole and then expanding himself to blow him up.
mm-hmm.
And in Worm they just do that and I respect it.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
they just go for it, and the fights are more about like manipulating your power and manipulating other people's powers than it is actually utilizing them to in its like most obvious way.
Yeah, it's the creativity of the fights is impressive in the writing, but it's also important to the story that it be like that. um
Hmm.
as we'll like learn way later. So it actually like the quality of the writing of the fights, I think, really feeds into the idea of the background of the setting. So, M said, love that. Let's see here. 1.5. It shows how Taylor reacts in really dire situations. Um, as she says, she almost died. It has the introduction of the Undersiders, who are going to be important characters moving forward. And it also, like, is just like there's not just individual heroes and villains, there's whole teams. Um, 1.6, we meet our first hero. We get a draining of tension after the fight. As things have been building up from 3 to 4 to 5, and really, we reach the climax when the Undersiders show up and the dogs attack Lung. Um, and Wildbow likes to level set at the end of arcs most of the time and reset us so that he can establish like what's going to happen and the emotional themes of an arc, and then build tension again and then have something happen, which I think is a good structure. Because otherwise, why have the arcs? Um, let's see here. Yeah, for 1.6, we also get a lot of world building from Armsmaster. He fleshes out some backstory about the Undersiders. We talk about the wards, the Protectorate. We get the idea that Lung is actually going to go to jail. It's not just he's not just beat up and then leaves. Um, and then we at 1.x we learn what interludes are. We get lots and lots of groundwork for later, both through the doc and through Danny. We see Danny's limited perspective of his daughter. We get to compare and contrast Taylor. Um, and I really feel like the book teaches you how to read as you go. One of the benefits of this arc being so short and not just being like 2 or 3 chapters is that you start to learn about what I was just talking about, how you will establish themes, you will establish setting, you will move to like building stakes, and then there will be action, and then resolution and draining of tension, and then there's usually like a denouement of like uh, an interlude. and then we move to the next arc, and that's kind of the basis for how the whole book works. And then on a smaller level, it teaches you how to read it by like learning that the perspective is going to be different, and it starts with a perspective that's really close to Taylor's, um, in terms of how Danny views the world. And later on, when the when the writing gets really good, we'll see all kinds of perspectives, and you'll see that the chapters feel significantly different than a Taylor chapter. Do you have anything to say, Vic?
Anything?
Okay, so do we want to move on to this?
Sure. This is I want to be clear, this is my idea because I think that your poems are going to be better than mine, so I need to take credit for something.
Well,
Um,
I saw yours and I was like, "Ugh, I'm such like a basic dummy." Like yours was so
whatever.
much more like emotionally based, and I just well, mine are too, but they just feel really basic when I saw the like
Well,
especially my first one versus yours.
we'll see. My idea for this week, which I wanted to do when we do our like arc roundup episodes,
Hmm.
I will probably be on most of them. Um,
I
that
was
we'll
hoping you'd
like
be on all of them.
we'll do like a thing. Um, but a lot of the things that we could do don't really work until we're further in the story. So my idea was to do a blackout poem with Danny's chapter, because I thought it would be really fun to see like there's just like so much in it that you can use to kind of mm, like form around the whole story. Do you know what I mean? Like his chapter is still relevant
At the
throughout the
yeah,
whole.
at like the end
Yeah,
of the book. You
yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so we wrote some of those and Greg actually submitted a couple too.
Yeah,
So,
we have two by me, uh one by Victoria and two by Greg. I actually I was going to defer labor to my audience and ask if anybody had an idea for something I could use like this, a little art project to pad out the next episode, cuz the next episode has the shortest chapter in the book as one of the two chapters, and it is very small. So, yeah, if anybody has any ideas, a poem that I could write, something like that, some
yeah, I'll have to
arbitrary
think about
restriction. But I thought the blackout poem, like when you proposed it, I was like, "Oh, what is that?" And I looked it up, and I was like, "I've seen a lot of these actually. I just didn't know what it was called." And then
Yeah.
I thought about it, and like seeing the different ones online, and like even just experimenting making the basic one and then the more intricate one. I was just like, "There's this is such a big possibility space. There's so much you can do with it." And I don't
Yeah,
think any of our Mhm.
I think that maybe later on if we don't have an idea for something, we could do more of them.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Because I think all five of our different poems are like very like they're using the same text theoretically, but they're not
Yeah.
just the same thing. So, let me change the scene to and did you name either of your or did you name your poem? And Greg, did you name either of your poems? Because
I I did not name my poem. I named it like in the actual doc Danny's Ode, but that's not really what it is.
okay, um, if you think of a name by the time we get to yours, and
Oh,
Greg, if you think of a name by the time we get to yours, feel free. But this is the first poem I made. It took me about 30 minutes. It is called Relief Became Anger. Let me pull it up on this other screen for myself to read. Relief became anger, a smoldering resentment, frustration. Danny Hebert had failed to do anything, hadn't stopped the bullies, hadn't protected his daughter. He stopped himself from walking into his daughter's room, confronting her, getting angry. He had inherited his father's. Uh, he had inherited. I should have blacked out. Was his father's famous temper, quick to rise and startling in its intensity, would go off on tirades, leaving people shaking. He had sworn to himself that he wouldn't ever lose his temper with his family. That was what kept him contained in his room. wanting to punch something. It shamed him. Taylor, hospitalized following the incident. He'd screamed at the school's principal. It had been bad. A nurse had threatened to call for a police officer. Danny harbored a deep fear. He would, in blind rage, do something about it. It made him feel sick. It took Danny a long time to calm down. He dreamed of the ocean. And so that's my first one, and it's a little hard when you use sentence fragments because of the way Wildbow writes. It's very like windy and it all like is tensed weird, but it's not tensed weird when you read all of it. Anyway, so it was a little, it just is what it is. Um
It was good. When you said that it was basic, I was thinking that was what you meant, where it's basically like a condensed, like essentially a condensed version of the chapter. So I was excited to hear that.
Gotcha. Well, I can't believe you're excited. I was not trying to project. The basicness is good, but I guess it is what it is. Then
Some of
the
us are basic and it's fine.
okay. The next one is Greg's, which I will read out because Greg was not wanting to. I'm gonna leave it as the small version right now, and then show the top and bottom of it in a minute. She wasn't happy. She was an easy target, victimized. Danny didn't do a thing, and his daughter disappeared. Her torment was all that was left. Oof. Kind of bots the reading a little bit, but I think it's good. I think it's really cool. And
Good job. Thank you,
let's
Greg, for the submission.
zoom in, and it's yeah, shoot, and then moving down here. And so I really thought this was cool. There's like cracks that you can see, and he left it with her emblem from later when she's a cape. Um,
Greg, you're crazy.
and you know what, I even realized that the yellow on left is like the yellow tinted lenses that Taylor sees the world through when she's a cape, and the background color and the color of the blacked out text is like um,
Like all the bugs.
well, I was gonna say like her costume that's made of bugs, but also
Yeah,
all the bugs.
all the bugs. That's why it's called worm.
Yeah, that's why it's called bug. Um, uh, M says, I like you reframed the fear of doing something about the bullies to Danny instead of what Danny thinks that Taylor thinks. I don't know if that makes sense. I like you both kept that Danny didn't do a thing. Yeah, it's pretty pivotal that Danny didn't do a thing. um, and then let's see here. I'm going to full screen, but then
Mine's a little bit longer,
change.
so I
Yes,
started to.
yours is actually in a tab that I need to scroll up and down on.
Okay.
So I'm going to move this as you read along, and then if you want to read it, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't name it while you were talking. I was distracted.
you were distracted by listening.
I was distracted by listening. Suspended in an ocean with his expression deeply sad, his facade a final cancer, or my mind the disease. I climbed and clasped a quiet golden spell, at first to intervene, I said, increased to extinguishing innumerable rumor and secrecy. The villains, the heroes, illusions divine, riot in the head, brain revealed, flawed at the core. Taylor was not in her bedroom. Give or take restless sleep, empty hours, countless times, the urge to ask her side of the bed struck. The urge was stupid. He became worse. The night was ominous, possibilities nagging, looming. He hated this neighborhood. Couldn't even articulate the sick, approaching the possibility, his little girl, victimized, pushed, resigned, precious. Threat or promise didn't ease his worries. Stubborn rules and regulations, all lured with blackmail or empty promises implied, impotent, helpless. She didn't want that, pleaded with him to have that relief. Weak. He stared at his closed bedroom door, an opportunity with reason opened. Coward. A shuddering anger, a hate that prayed, a control that was tormenting, a father broken and contained, never there, promise breaking, shouting shame, harbored rage, but his daughter was dealing with her problems she was yet to break.
Very good, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought that that was way more poetic than either of the ones I did.
Well, I don't know, but I do write probably more poetry than you do.
I would assume. I think these may be the first poems I've ever written. So, yes. Um, you got to remember, I'm uneducated.
That's
So,
fine. Emily shared a lot of my poems. Because I'm disgusting.
all right. Does anybody want to say anything? Greg says, very nicely done. Loved it.
Thank
M said, sheesh, and clapped. Um, all right. I think we're moving on. I don't think there's any other people in the chat. So,
That's fine.
um, this one is pretty convoluted and it's windy. And oh, Victoria, you wrote a poem for me one time. I think about it a lot. Well, there you go. Boom.
It's embarrassing. I think about it a lot too.
Oh man, I had a poem written for me that I think about a lot, but
Oh,
uh, you know, you know how it goes.
you
So
know.
so I'm relating to M and not you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna explain this real quick. The first poem I had was Relief Became Anger. This is Danny's Spiral. It's much more abstract than the first one, which was just a very literal take on the material. In this one, the line is sort of Danny on a downward mental spiral, and so you follow the text in order of when the line hits it. Um, but then there's a background layer that the background itself is another blackout poem, and some of the words are struck through by the spiral. So, let's see here. So the main poem is Danny was tired. His heart couldn't go on. If she wasn't here, would he be enough for his daughter? Couldn't do this alone. I need you, Annette. Um, so, just
Danny.
a much
He's
shorter
such
one.
a sad boy.
Yeah, he's a real sad boy. Yeah. So, that is the basic layer, and I don't know. I think it looks kind of silly, but I'm also really proud of it. I wasn't sure what to do at first. I put together the first, like, Danny was tired, his heart couldn't go on, but then it was just like not in order, and I was like not finding a way to make it work. And then I was like, these don't have to go in the word order of the chapter. They can do anything based on like a bunch of other ones I've seen that are just all over the
Yeah.
place. As long as there's visual indicators that make it clear what you're supposed to do. Um, and I mean, like, theoretically, even if there's not, but it's better if it's legible, I think, in that
Yeah, and I
way.
think that the title brings it together, so that's really cool.
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure how I would want to do it at first because I was like gonna loop it around, and I was thinking through the possibilities, and I was like, it needs to be something meaningful in some way, like the shape. And it didn't turn out quite how I wanted because, again, I just needed to hit certain words on the page. But I, when I thought about it more, I was like, the fact that this spiral is so inconsistent and then crashes off the page is kind of excellent. Um, so then the background text, and I'll kind of read out when it's struck through as well. Um, the background text I picked out and I hadn't drawn the shape yet, so I kind of struck through words on purpose, but a few of them just were casualties. But the first portion is mean, persistent, threatening. Emma, Taylor, galled, impotent. Daughter gone 12 hours. Wait, pray. And mean is struck through there by accident. Uh, and then and all the lines are hand drawn with a mouse, so if they look shaky, they are. Uh, Vibrations, warm air, which is struck through. Cold outdoors, muffled whoosh, relief, abject fear, hurt, vulnerable, humiliation, bullies. Pleaded, body language, averted eye contact with eye contact struck through. Finished or unfinished sentences, things left unsaid, which the middle portion of that is struck through. Bullying, reality, shame, hope, with hope fully struck through. Danny thought, awake, cowardly, fear, tormented, humiliated, shuddering, sigh, and then humiliated and shuddering got hit as casualties of the spiral. Relief became anger, another casualty. Taylor, making him worry being struck through on purpose. Smoldering resentment. Trust, struck through. Hated, bullies, struck through. Frustration. Danny Hebert was the one person is struck through. He could control in all of this. Failed. Hadn't protected. Shouting. Demanding answers. What had she been doing? Bond forged, inherited, famous temper, quick to rise, startling intensity, tirades that would leave people shaking. And the reason it stops there and not earlier is kind of just that's how far down on the page I wanted to go. I wanted the image to be the right size to have the text I needed for the spiral, have a bottom section for the split letters for I Need You Annette, and yeah, so there's all that, and there's a few little things that I had really liked where like Bond and Forged have the word you like contained between them basically. So yeah, I was pretty happy with that one.
I
Not
love it.
not to go on
I
too long about my own work.
It's okay. I will go on about what a good activity I picked because everybody everybody had fun with it.
Yeah. You nailed it. Um,
Great. And then
that
we
one is
can read
sad. I
Greg's
like it.
really deep one.
Yeah, we can read Greg's like ultimate deep poem. This is Shakespearean. Uh,
You might want to sit down for this.
Banged on the kitchen counter, the occasional groan. After she had come, the rhythmic creak as she ascended. He was awake and available.
Hell yeah, Danny.
God damn it.
Uh,
That is in the style of audiobook cut-ups that Greg and I used to listen to when we were kids, where they would take usually children's books and just make something heinous out of them.
terrible.
Well, because they
Was
use such
awake.
like casual language that is like innuendo in an adult book, but not in a children's book.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, am awake and available. Okay, I am going to revert this to be Danny once more. Okay, and then getting back to here. All right, we're most of the way done for the listener participation. It's a pretty basic question here. I might flesh it out a little bit on the Discord, whatever, we'll see. How do you feel? And this is for after you've read chapters 2.1 and 2.2. Also, we didn't actually talk about the listener participation from last week. I gotta remember to insert that at the beginning of the episode. Did anyone have their own Arc 1 reflections, or did no one do it? Because it's fine if no one did.
Wait. What was the question again?
The question was, scrolling up, there was a lot in that last chapter. Last week's was reflect on Arc 1 as a whole, then talk about the themes and motifs you noticed. M didn't do the homework. Well, what did you notice so far, M? What do you think about the story? We're one arc in.
Do you like it?
Do you like it?
Do you like the story?
Are
Are
you
enjoying
excited?
yourself? Yeah, I'm excited. She's gonna fucking love it once I don't know. Once Taylor starts.
Going ham?
Yeah,
I would describe much of her behavior as going ham.
going ham. Emily says I like that. I still feel like Taylor is morally ambiguous. Yeah, Uh, if you like that, you're gonna like the whole book.
Yeah, she's a pretty morally ambiguous figure.
I think
Greg,
that almost all of the characters are morally ambiguous, which is super fun.
I can't actually think of a character who is like exclusively good all the time. You know what I mean?
I think that Golem is pretty much exclusively good all the time. And Weld.
I suppose I think of like if you only take him into account as Golem, but if you take him into account when we know him earlier in his civilian identity in the background as a character,
Hmm.
then I
I
mean
don't know.
not that anything's like really his fault, but it's just like the way that he is and his inability to like change his circumstances, like he's just not a perfect person.
I
And
guess I guess in like real life he would be like an immorally ambiguous person. Like people wouldn't know how to feel about him. I guess that's true.
yeah, I'm just thinking of like when you consider ending stuff like how he feels about his step family even in the end.
Yeah.
And he has warm feelings about them, and like it is like it's specifically touched about and talked about that he has like mixed feelings about like the fact that he has such warm feelings for them. So, M is saying, ba, 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 ba. I guess that's what I like about it. It seems realistic. It makes me feel like invincible. If you guys watch that, they make the existence of superpowers more based on the real world. It's funny because I watched Invincible and I thought to myself, like, how unrealistic the setting felt compared to something like Worm. Um,
Dude.
so, not to just trash talk Invincible, but like, mm, just everything felt a little off. um, I overall would give Invincible, and I have high standards for shows, so like this is not to say it's trash, but like a 5 or 6 out of 10. It was pretty middle of the road for me. Once I like had time to consider it afterward, it is very visually stunning at times, but um, it's no White Lotus. So I guess that's all for the audience participation backlog, which we just jumped back to. At next time, I will start the episode with the audience participation rather than end it. So the next week's thing after you've read 2.1 and 2.2 is how do you feel like the online culture interacts with Cape World? With the Cape World. So like they have a message board essentially, and like how do you feel like that is? Anyway, thoughts on it. Um, the last few episodes, I forgot to include important information, which is that you can support the actual writer of the work, Wildbow. Um, he has a Patreon, which is patreon.com/wildbow. It's very easy to find. It has cover art that is the protagonists for several of his stories, including Taylor as the main prominent one in the center. Um, and the full text is available at parahumans.wordpress.com, and the full fan-made audiobook can be found at audioworm.rain-online.org, which is complicated to express verbally. So all those links will be in the description of the stream, and we'll put them in the Discord as well. Um, thanks for listening this week. I hope everybody enjoyed the Blackout Poems and Vic being on the show. I'm not sure what the exact plans are for guests, but I've talked to at least one other person who's interested in being on, and I think it's going to be really fun. I want Vic to be in the end of arc ones at least, so that's what we've talked about so far. Um, I know it's more work to be on the thing than to not be on it, so. Uh, and then Next week, the live stream will be at the same time. It will be at 1 p.m. Mountain and noon Pacific on Saturday the 19th. And we will determine the audiobook reading next week and post it Saturday morning. It's just dependent on how long the chapters last. So I think it'll probably be another one that's like 30 or 45 minutes, depending. I haven't looked, so. Um, and then Victoria, do you want to say anything as we go out?
I don't have anything to plug. We can go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here, Victoria, and I am going to end the stream. Goodbye, everybody. It was fun, Em. Thank you.